So this video will go over section 8.9, which is on osmosis. Um, so the membranes that surrounds living cells is a semi-permeable membrane. What it means to be a semi-permeable membrane is that it allows some particles to go through and not others. And the semi-permeable membranes of living cells allow water and small molecules, small neutral molecules to pass across, but ions and large molecules cannot go through the pores of the semi-permeable membrane. You can see the illustration here where you have on one side of the membrane, so the membrane is illustrated as the gray wall in between the two sides, and there are some pores where we can see some water molecule go through. So on the right side we have a solvent only, which is water, and on the left side of the semi-permeable membrane we see that we have water and we have another molecule that is a solute here, and by the look of it, it looks like glucose. So for example, glucose is a too big a molecule to go through the pores of the semi-permeable membrane of living cells. So only small molecules like oxygen or carbon dioxide, which are a small neutral molecule, they can go through. But glucose is already too big to go through, and ions in particular cannot go through. And they will go through ion channels. So they have their own ways to go through the semi-permeable membrane. So diffusion of solute down the concentration gradient is not possible when you have a semi-permeable membrane, for example. So it's the solvent who will move. So this illustration here is showing you a container that looks like a tube with two sides, and in the middle at the bottom of it you have a semi-permeable membrane, and the solvent is water on both sides, and you see what is called the contaminant or solute. We call them solute. So there's a lot more solute on the left side and very few solute particles on the right side. So if there was not a semi-permeable membrane between the two sides, the solute could go by diffusion. It could spread from the left side to the right side down its concentration gradient. That's what it means. Diffusion is when a solute will move from where it's in high concentration to where it's in low concentration by diffusion. But here it's not possible because of the semi-permeable membrane. And so to compensate for that, the solvent will move. And then it's called osmosis. Osmosis is the passage of a solvent, and usually it's water, across a semi-permeable membrane from a solution of low solute concentration to a solution of higher solute concentration. So water here is moving where it's less concentrated in solute to where it's more concentrated in solute. And it does that to try to equalize the concentration on both sides. By moving away from the diluted side, it will concentrate it more. And by moving into the side where there is more solute, it will dilute it. And so this way, trying to compensate the difference in concentration between both sides. So in the illustration we have here, water would move from right to left, from where it's less concentrated to where it's more concentrated in solute. So it's called osmosis because it's the movement of the solvent, because the particles, the solute, are prevented from moving across the semi-permeable membrane. So, so because water moves from the right side to the left side in order to dilute the left side where it's more concentrated, the level of the water on both sides of the container will be different. Where on the side where the water leaves, the level of the water will go down. And on the side where the water moves in, the level of the water will move up. And so you will have now a difference between the two levels of the liquid between the two sides. And so this difference of amount of liquid means that the excess fluid here is, pushed down by the gravity, and that force of pushing down is called the pressure. And so the excess fluid here will exert pressure on the liquid. And we call this pressure of the excess fluid the osmotic pressure. And so the osmotic pressure is the pressure that prevents the flow of additional solvent into a solution on one side of a semi-permeable membrane. So water would move from right to left here until it cannot push more against the gravity, basically. Right? At some point, the difference of amount of fluid from both sides will be too heavy, too bare, and water will stop moving from the left to the right at the point where it's in equilibrium with the osmotic pressure. So this osmotic pressure is, allowing water to move from left to right until it had reached that point where there is equilibrium between the two forces. So let's practice with a learning check here to see how we understand this. So a 1 molar glucose solution is separated from a 2 molar glucose solution by a semi-permeable membrane. So imagine the same type of container as we saw in the previous slide. And let's imagine that we have 1 molar on the left side and a 2 molar glucose solution on the right side. And there is a semi-permeable membrane between the two. So which solution exerts the greater osmotic pressure? So to answer that question, you need to think about what it means, a greater osmotic pressure. And a greater osmotic pressure will be made by the solution that has more solute, that is more concentrated, right? So the greater the number of dissolved particles and the higher the osmotic pressure. So we have to decide between a 1 molar glucose solution and a 2 molar glucose solution, which one is more concentrated. And here the solute, the identity of the solute is the same, it's glucose. And glucose, when it's dissolved in water, is just a big neutral molecule, and it stays the same. It doesn't dissociate into ions, for example. So it stays as one big neutral molecule. So when you have 1 mole of glucose, it's 1 mole of dissolved particles. And when you have 2 moles of glucose, it's 2 moles of dissolved particles. So here it's easy to compare and see that the 2 molar glucose solution is more concentrated than the 1 molar glucose solution. So if you have more particles in the 2 molar solution, then it will be exerting the greater osmotic pressure because it has more dissolved particles per unit of volume. Remember how osmosis is a colligative property, which means it depends on the number of dissolved particles. And it doesn't matter the identity of the solute. What matters is the number of solute particles that are present per unit of volume. So then in which direction will water flow between the two solutions? So if you have the 1 molar being less concentrated than the 2 molar solution, and if the glucose itself cannot move across the semi-permeable membrane, then the water will move to try to compensate for the difference of concentration, and water goes from the low solute concentration to the high solute concentration. So it will move from the 1 molar uh, solution to the 2 molar solution, because it's from the less concentrated to the more concentrated. Right, by doing this, water tries to dilute the more concentrated solution and concentrate the less concentrated solution. So describe the level of the two solutions when equilibrium is reached. So water moves from the 1 molar to the 2 molar, and so the level on the side where you have the 2 molar glucose solution will be higher, and the level of water in the 1 molar side of the container will decrease, right? Since the water flows into the 2 molar solution, its height will increase, and the height of the 1 molar glucose solution will decrease. So let's practice some more with a more tricky example here. It's more tricky because you have to remember that osmosis is a colligative property that depends on the number of solute particles that are dissolved. And it doesn't matter if they are small ions or big neutral molecule, right? It doesn't matter. It's the number of dissolved particles that matters. So this time we have a 1 molar glucose solution that is separated from a 0.75 molar NaCl solution. And they are separated by a semi-permeable membrane, which means they cannot move across the semi-permeable membrane. So they are stuck each on their side. So let's say we have the 1 molar glucose solution on the left and the 0.75 molar solution on the right. So we have to decide which solution exerts the greater osmotic pressure. So to find the solution that exerts the greater osmotic pressure, again, you need to find the solution that has the most dissolved particles in it. And so if you look at it quickly without paying attention, you may think, oh, the 1 molar is more concentrated than the 0.75 molar NaCl solution. But you have to think about the identity of the solute and ask yourself, when glucose dissolves, does it make one molecule or more than one? And we have already seen that glucose, when it dissolves in water, it's a big neutral molecule and it stays as one molecule of glucose. So when you have 1 molar glucose solution, it dissolves into 1 mole of glucose per liter. So we have 1 particle per formula, basically, per name. From the 0.75 molar NaCl solution, NaCl is an ionic compound. And we know that ionic compounds dissociate into their ions when they are dissolving in water. So when you have 0.75 moles of NaCl, in fact, NaCl dissociates into Na plus and Cl minus, because Na is from group 1A, so it becomes the Na plus ion. Cl chlorine is from group 7A, so it becomes the Cl minus 1 ion. And it's one of each, right? The subscripts are 1 and 1. So when you have one formula of NaCl, you actually get 2 particles, 2 ions, Na plus and Cl minus. So from 1 mole of NaCl, you would get 2 moles of solute. So from 0.75 moles of NaCl, you get 0.75 0.75 moles of Na plus and 0.75 moles of Cl minus in 1 liter, right? So then you need to add those two. And so basically it's 2 times 0.75 moles of NaCl, and you have in fact 1.5 moles of solute in 1 liter, because you need to multiply the molarity, 0.75 moles per liter, by the number of particles per formula. And you have 2 particles per NaCl formula. So 2 times 0.075, it's 1.5 moles of solute in 1 liter. So you see that in fact it's the 0.75 molar NaCl solution that is more concentrated from the point of view of osmosis. So that means the 0.75 molar NaCl solution will exert the greater osmotic pressure because it's more concentrated. So then in which direction will water flow between the two solutions? So because those particles of glucose and NaCl cannot move across the semipermeable membrane, then water will move to compensate for the difference in concentrations. And it will go from low solute concentration to high solute concentration, which means here it will go from the 1 molar glucose solution, which is less concentrated, to the more concentrated solution, and it's the 0.75 molar NaCl solution. So water will flow from the 1 molar glucose to the 0.75 molar NaCl. So now if we need to describe the level of the two solutions when equilibrium is reached, so knowing that water flows away from the 1 molar glucose solution, that means the level of the 1 molar glucose solution will decrease, and the level of the 0.75 molar Na solution will increase because water flows into it. Right, if I read what is written, since the water flows into the 0.75 molar NaCl solution, its height will increase, and the height of the 1 molar glucose solution will decrease. So that covers the first part of osmosis.